comes a point in some people's lives when they stop dreaming and start surviving. Daniel Carter reached that point at 58. Once he had a career, a family, a home, a future. Now everything he owned fit inside a single duffel bag. Most people would have given up. Most people would have accepted that life had already passed them by. Then Daniel bought a collapsing fire truck house for $5. Not because it looked valuable, not because he had a plan, because it was the only thing in the world he could still afford. What he found hidden inside a few days later would force an entire town to confront a truth buried for more than 2 decades. Daniel Carter hated shelters, not because the people were cruel. Most of them weren't. Not because the food was bad. Some days it was surprisingly decent. He hated shelters because every night they reminded him of the same thing. He didn't belong there. At least that was what a stubborn part of his heart kept insisting. For 32 years, he had been a firefighter. For 32 years, people called him when their lives were falling apart. For 32 years, he ran toward danger while everyone else ran away. And now, he slept in a room filled with strangers whose lives had collapsed just as badly as his own. Life had a strange sense of humor. Daniel sat on the edge of his bunk as the morning lights flickered on. Around him, men slowly woke up. Some prepared for construction jobs. Others headed toward day labor centers. A few simply wandered through another day with nowhere to be. Daniel picked up his duffel bag, the same faded military green duffel he'd carried for almost 3 years. Everything important in his life now fit inside it. 3 shirts, a pair of jeans, photographs, paperwork, a few tools, and a worn firefighter badge he couldn't bring himself to throw away. The badge wasn't worth anything. Officially, it belonged to a man who no longer existed, a man who lost everything 20 years ago. Yet Daniel carried it anyway, maybe because it reminded him that once upon a time he had mattered. He walked outside. Cold morning air greeted him. The town of Silver Creek slowly came alive around him. Coffee shops opened. Businesses unlocked their doors. People started their cars. Nobody paid attention to the homeless man walking down the sidewalk. Daniel preferred it that way. When people recognized him, things became awkward. Some remembered the headlines. Some remembered the accusations. Some remembered the fire. Almost nobody remembered the truth, because the truth never made the newspapers. Only the blame did. Daniel stopped outside a small diner. The smell of breakfast drifted through the open doorway. Bacon, coffee, fresh biscuits. His stomach growled immediately. He checked his pocket. $5. Exactly 5. His final $5. Enough for breakfast. Maybe, if he chose carefully. The bell above the door jingled as he stepped inside. Several customers glanced up. Most looked away. One woman behind the counter smiled politely. "Morning, Daniel." He returned the smile. "Morning, Nancy." Nancy had worked there for years. One of the few people who never treated him differently after everything happened. She poured coffee into a mug before he even sat down. Daniel appreciated that. Small kindnesses meant more when life got hard. Nancy placed the coffee in in front of him. "You hear about the county auction?" Daniel shook his head. "No. Old properties, abandoned equipment, bunch of junk they want gone." He took a sip. The coffee tasted wonderful. "Sounds exciting." Nancy laughed. "About as exciting as watching paint dry." Then she leaned closer. "Free donuts if you attend." Daniel raised an eyebrow. Free. Now you've got my attention." Both laughed. It felt good. Simple. Normal. For a few seconds, Daniel almost forgot his problems. Almost. Then reality returned, as it always did. Nancy noticed him, checking his money. Her smile faded slightly. "You okay?" Daniel nodded. The automatic response. The lie people tell, because the truth is exhausting. "Doing fine." She didn't challenge him. Good people know when someone wants privacy. Daniel finished his coffee and eventually headed toward the county fairgrounds, where the auction was being held. Not because he planned to buy anything. He couldn't afford anything. But free donuts were free donuts. And when you were homeless, free mattered. A lot. The auction looked exactly like every county auction. Rows of folding chairs, old equipment, abandoned machinery, retired vehicles, broken trailers, forgotten buildings, the kind of things nobody wanted anymore. Daniel grabbed a donut and found a place near the back. The auctioneer spoke endlessly. Tractors, storage containers, old fencing, generators. Daniel barely listened. Most items sold for far more money than he possessed. Then something caught his attention. Not because it looked valuable, because it looked sad. A photograph appeared on the auction screen. A tiny structure sitting alone in the desert. Part cabin, part fire truck, part disaster. The truck itself looked ancient. Rust covered almost every surface. Several windows were broken. Part of the roof had collapsed. The porch leaned sideways. One corner looked ready to fall over completely. The auctioneer cleared his throat. "Property number 27. Scattered laughter immediately followed. Daniel wasn't surprised. The building looked ridiculous. The auctioneer continued. Former volunteer fire station residence located outside town. More laughter. Structure requires extensive repairs. Someone shouted from the crowd. "That's being generous." The audience laughed again. The auctioneer smiled. "Includes original fire truck frame, integrated into building foundation." Another man raised his hand. "Can it even stand?" Technically, that generated even more laughter. Daniel studied the photograph. Something about the place felt familiar. Not physically familiar, emotionally familiar. Broken, forgotten, abandoned, the same way he often felt. The auctioneer continued. "County has determined restoration costs exceed property value." Translation: worthless. The auctioneer finally sighed. Opening bid $5. Silence. Nobody raised a hand. The auctioneer waited. Still nothing. Several people weren't even looking anymore. Daniel stared at the image. The little house stood alone beneath a desert sunset. Forgotten. Ignored. Nobody wanted it. Nobody cared. For some reason, that bothered him. Maybe because he understood exactly how that felt. The auctioneer tried again. $5. Nothing. A long silence followed. Then Daniel slowly raised his hand. The room turned. Several people looked at him. The homeless man, the guy from the headlines, the washed-up firefighter. Daniel almost lowered his hand. Almost. Then the auctioneer smiled. $5. No other bids appeared. Not one. The gavel came down seconds later. Sold. The crowd laughed politely. A few people shook their heads. One man actually applauded. Daniel wasn't sure if it was encouragement or mockery. Maybe both. The auction manager approached afterward carrying paperwork. The woman looked confused. You seriously want this? Daniel signed the form. I guess so. She frowned. Most people would have bought lunch. Daniel smiled. Most people aren't me. Before we continue, have you ever noticed that life sometimes hides opportunities in places everyone else ignores? The things people laugh at, the things people call worthless, the things nobody wants. Sometimes those are the very things that end up changing everything. And Daniel Carter was about to discover that in a way nobody could have imagined. The drive took nearly an hour. The property sat deep in the desert beyond Silver Creek, far from town, far from neighbors, far from everything. Daniel followed a dirt road until the structure finally appeared. Then he stopped the borrowed county truck and simply stared. The photograph hadn't done it justice. The place looked worse, much worse. The porch sagged badly. Paint peeled from every wall. Part of the roof looked ready to collapse entirely. The fire truck itself sat embedded into the structure like a fossil from another era. Rust covered everything, nature slowly reclaiming what people forgot. Daniel stepped out. Wind swept across the desert. The old building creaked softly, like it was alive, like it was tired, like it had been waiting a long time for someone to visit. Daniel walked slowly toward it. The front steps groaned beneath his weight. The door stuck halfway before finally opening. Dust filled the air. The interior looked rough. One room, a tiny kitchen, an old wood stove, broken furniture, water damage, years of neglect. Most people would have turned around immediately. Daniel didn't. Instead, he walked deeper inside, examining, observing, thinking. Then he noticed something. A faded photograph hanging crooked on one wall. Daniel stepped closer. The image showed firefighters standing beside the very same truck decades earlier. Young, smiling, proud, a community gathered around them. Families, children, volunteers, hope. The photograph stopped him cold because he understood that smile. Every firefighter understood it. The feeling that your work mattered, that your sacrifices mattered, that people trusted you. Daniel stared for several seconds, then gently straightened the frame. The gesture surprised even him. He wasn't sure why he did it. Maybe respect, maybe habit, maybe something else. Outside, the sun slowly began sinking. Orange light filled the windows. Daniel carried his duffel bag inside, set it near the stove, then sat down on an old chair. The wood creaked loudly. The desert stretched endlessly outside. For the first time in years, nobody was telling him to leave. Nobody was judging him. Nobody was watching him. The place wasn't much, but it was his. $5. That thought almost made him laugh. Then something caught his eye. A section of floor near the truck's original cab looked different from the rest. Not damaged, not repaired. Different, like someone had replaced it long ago. Daniel frowned. Interesting, very interesting. Slowly he stood, then walked toward it, and as the final sunlight disappeared beyond the horizon, Daniel Carter unknowingly took his first step toward the secret that had been waiting beneath that fire truck for more than 20 years. Daniel Carter stood over the strange section of floor for nearly a minute. The rest of the cabin looked exactly how you'd expect a forgotten building to look. Rotten wood, dust, water damage, neglect. But this section felt different, deliberate. The boards weren't newer. They were older, yet they had been installed with unusual care. Every nail sat perfectly aligned. Every plank fit tightly together, almost as if whoever built it wanted the floor to survive longer than everything around it. Interesting. Daniel crouched down, ran his fingers across the wood, then knocked lightly. The sound immediately changed. Most of the floor produced a dull thud. This section produced a hollow echo. His firefighter instincts instantly noticed it. Something existed underneath. The question was what? Daniel considered pulling it apart immediately, then looked outside. Darkness had already settled over the desert. The old structure barely had electricity. Whatever mystery existed beneath those boards had waited years. One more night wouldn't hurt. He grabbed an old blanket from his duffel bag and spread it beside the wood stove. Not exactly comfortable, but compared to a shelter bunk, it felt surprisingly peaceful. For the first time in months, he fell asleep without hearing traffic, arguments, or dozens of strangers breathing around him. Just desert wind and silence. The next morning arrived, with sunlight pouring through cracked windows. Daniel woke early. Habit, 32 years as a firefighter, had trained his body to rise before dawn. Even retirement couldn't erase that. He stepped outside, holding a mug of instant coffee. The desert stretched endlessly around him. Golden light painted the distant hills. For a moment, life almost felt normal again. Almost. Then reality returned. His bank account contained nothing. His future contained even less. And his house was literally falling apart. Daniel laughed quietly. At least the view was nice. A pickup truck suddenly appeared on the dirt road. Interesting. Nobody should have known he was here. The truck rolled closer before stopping near the porch. A middle-aged man climbed out. Expensive boots, expensive watch, expensive sunglasses. The type of man who didn't belong in the middle of nowhere. Daniel immediately recognized him. Everyone in Silver Creek did. Randall Pierce, owner of Pierce Development, one of the wealthiest men in the county. Randall smiled as he approached. The smile never reached his eyes. Mr. Carter. Daniel nodded. Mr. Pierce. The businessman glanced around. His expression made it clear what he thought of the property. Nothing good. You actually bought it. Daniel sipped his coffee. Looks that way. Randall laughed. The fake, friendly kind. thought the county clerk was joking. Daniel remained silent. People often reveal more when silence makes them uncomfortable. Randall looked toward the fire truck house, then back at Daniel. I'd like to buy it. That was fast. Interesting. Very interesting. Daniel raised an eyebrow. You drove all the way out here for that. Business opportunity. Daniel glanced at the collapsing roof. Looks like a strange opportunity. Randall's smile tightened slightly. Only slightly. I own most of the land surrounding this area. There it was. The real conversation. Not friendship. Not curiosity. Business. Randall removed a checkbook. $500. Daniel almost laughed. He paid $5 yesterday. Now someone wanted to pay $500. That alone made him suspicious. Generous. Randall shrugged. I don't like scattered ownership. Daniel looked around. Miles of empty desert. Nobody in sight. No development. No construction. Nothing. Something didn't fit. The businessman sensed hesitation. Think about it. Then he handed Daniel a business card. Before leaving, Randall looked at the house one final time. Not casually, carefully, like a man inspecting something important. Then he drove away. Daniel watched the dust cloud disappear. The entire conversation lasted less than 5 minutes, yet it left him with a strange feeling. The same feeling firefighters get before a building collapses. Instinct, experience, a warning. Randall Pierce wanted something, and it wasn't the land. The floorboards occupied Daniel's thoughts for the rest of the morning. Eventually, curiosity won. He grabbed a hammer from his duffel bag, then returned to the strange section. One nail, then another, then another. The wood resisted, not because of age, because whoever installed it knew what they were doing. After nearly 40 minutes, the first board finally came loose. Dust rose into the air. Daniel leaned closer and immediately frowned. Beneath the floor wasn't dirt. It was metal, old metal, painted red. His heartbeat increased slightly. The truck, the compartment sat directly above part of the truck's original structure. Interesting. Daniel removed more boards, then more. Eventually, a rectangular section became visible. A metal hatch, hidden beneath the floor, completely concealed. Not accidental, definitely intentional. Daniel stared at it. Now things were getting interesting. The hatch contained a rusted handle. He pulled. Nothing. Pulled harder. Still nothing. The mechanism had seized years ago. Daniel spent the next hour cleaning rust from the edges. Eventually, the hatch groaned, then shifted slightly, then opened. A wave of stale air escaped. Daniel expected valuables. Money, jewelry, documents, something obvious. Instead, he found something strange. A firefighter helmet, an old flashlight, a folded American flag, and several weathered notebooks. Nothing valuable, at least not financially. Daniel carefully lifted the first notebook. Dust covered the cover. Most of the writing had faded, but one name remained visible. Captain Henry Walker. Daniel froze. The name meant something. Not immediately, but something. Then the memory returned. Henry Walker, former volunteer fire chief. one of the most respected firefighters in county history, dead nearly 25 years. Daniel remembered hearing stories about him as a rookie. The old captain had become something of a local legend. Why would his belongings be hidden beneath a floor? That made no sense. Daniel opened the first notebook. The pages contained daily entries, equipment reports, maintenance notes, community events. Nothing unusual until the final pages. The handwriting changed, became rushed, uneven, concerned. Daniel read carefully and slowly sat down because the final entry didn't discuss firefighting. It discussed fear. If anyone finds this, the truth didn't stay buried. I've spent 3 years trying to decide what to do. 3 years trying to decide who to trust. The fire wasn't an accident. Some people know that. Some people helped cover it up. If anything happens to me, look inside the truck. The real evidence isn't here. It's hidden where nobody would ever think to search. Daniel stopped reading. The room suddenly felt smaller. The air felt heavier. His eyes moved back to the page. He read it again, then a third time. The fire, not an accident. The words echoed through his mind. Because there was only one fire people still talked about after 20 years. The warehouse fire. The same fire that destroyed his life. The same fire that cost him everything. His hands slowly tightened around the notebook. No, that wasn't possible. The notebook was older than the warehouse fire. Much older. Different fire. Had to be. Yet something inside him disagreed. Something felt connected. A loud engine outside interrupted his thoughts. Daniel looked through the window. Another vehicle approached. This time it wasn't Randall Pierce. It was an old blue pickup. A woman stepped out, mid-30s, brown hair, carrying a camera. She looked surprised to find someone actually living there. Daniel stepped outside. The woman smiled. Sorry, I didn't mean to trespass. You're fine. She glanced toward the house. You're the guy who bought it. Word traveled fast. Looks that way. The woman extended a hand. Emily Foster. Daniel shook it. The name sounded familiar. Then he remembered. Local newspaper. One of the few reporters left in Silver Creek. Emily looked excited. I've been trying to photograph this place for months. Daniel smiled. Most people photograph things that aren't falling apart. Emily laughed. You'd be surprised. Then her eyes landed on the open floorboards, visible through the doorway. The smile disappeared. What did you find? Interesting question. Most people would have asked if he found anything. She asked what, as if she expected something. Daniel studied her carefully. Why? Emily hesitated. Only briefly, but Daniel noticed. Then she sighed. My grandfather used to work here. Now things were becoming even more interesting. Henry Walker. Her eyes widened. Immediately, that reaction told Daniel everything. She knew the name. Very well. Emily stepped forward. How do you know that? Daniel held up the notebook. For several seconds, neither spoke. The wind moved softly through the desert. Finally, Emily whispered something unexpected. Then it's true. Daniel frowned. What's true? The reporter looked toward the old fire truck. then toward the hidden compartment, then back at him, and the next words sent a chill through Daniel's chest. My grandfather always said there was something hidden inside this truck, that certain people would do anything to keep secret. Silence, heavy silence. Then Emily looked directly at him. What exactly did you find? Daniel hadn't answered yet when another sound drifted across the desert. An engine, fast, approaching, very fast. Both turned toward the road. A black SUV raced toward the property, and judging by the speed, whoever was inside wasn't coming for a friendly conversation. The black SUV tore across the desert road. Dust exploded behind it. The vehicle wasn't slowing down, not even slightly. Daniel and Emily exchanged a look. Neither liked what they were seeing, because people who wanted a friendly conversation usually drove normally. Whoever sat behind that windshield seemed to be in a hurry, a serious hurry. The SUV finally skidded to a stop near the porch. The driver's door opened immediately. A large man stepped out, mid-50s, expensive clothes, silver watch, professional smile, the kind of smile that belonged in boardrooms, not deserts, not abandoned fire truck houses. The man looked at Daniel, then at Emily, then at the exposed floorboards inside the cabin, and for the briefest moment, his smile vanished. Interesting, very interesting, because that meant he knew exactly what he was looking at. The smile returned instantly, but Daniel had already seen enough. The man walked forward and extended a hand. Daniel Carter. Daniel ignored the hand. The stranger didn't seem offended. He simply lowered it. My name is Gregory Vance. The name meant nothing to Daniel, but Emily reacted, only slightly. Still, Daniel noticed. The reporter knew the name. Gregory smiled. I represent several private investors. Of course you do. Daniel had heard that phrase before, usually right before someone tried hiding what they really wanted. Gregory looked toward the house, then toward the truck, then toward the exposed floor. Again, the man was trying to be subtle. He wasn't succeeding. I understand you recently acquired this property. Daniel nodded. Yesterday. Gregory reached into his jacket, pulled out a folder, then calmly handed over a document. Daniel looked down. His eyes widened slightly. $25,000. The offer sat right there in writing. $25,000 for a collapsing shack, a rusted fire truck, and worthless desert land. Emily's eyes widened too, because everyone understood the same thing immediately. Nobody pays $25,000 for junk. Not unless the junk isn't actually junk. Gregory smiled. A generous offer. Daniel looked up. Yesterday, a different man offered $500. The smile tightened, only slightly. Then I would say this is significantly better. Daniel didn't respond, because he was thinking. Fast. Yesterday, the property was worthless. Today, someone wanted it badly enough to offer $25,000. That wasn't coincidence. That was panic, and panic meant leverage. Gregory studied him carefully, then looked toward the notebook, still sitting on the table inside. His eyes lingered a little too long. There it was, the mistake, The first real mistake, because now Daniel knew exactly what mattered. Not the land, not the truck, the notebook. Gregory immediately realized he'd looked too long. His smile returned, professional, controlled, but the damage was done. Daniel had spent decades reading dangerous situations, and right now, every instinct he possessed screamed the same warning. Something inside this property mattered. A lot. Gregory cleared his throat. Think about the offer. Then he handed over a business card. Call anytime. He started back toward the SUV, then paused. One final glance toward the notebook. One final glance toward the exposed compartment. Then he drove away. The dust cloud lingered long after the vehicle disappeared. Silence settled over the desert. Emily looked at Daniel. Daniel looked at the notebook. Neither spoke immediately, because the conclusion was obvious. Whatever Henry Walker hid, people were still afraid of it. 25 years later, Emily finally broke the silence. That's Gregory Vance. Daniel looked up. You know him? The reporter nodded. I know who he works for. Interesting. Daniel folded his arms. Which is? Emily hesitated, then sighed. Randall Pierce. That wasn't surprising. Not anymore. In fact, Daniel would have been more surprised if Randall wasn't involved. The wealthy developer had shown up less than 24 hours after the auction. Now another man arrived, offering 50 times the property's value. The timing wasn't subtle. Emily looked toward the road, making sure the SUV was gone, then lowered her voice. Randall's family has owned businesses here for decades. Daniel nodded, still listening. Emily continued. People think they built Silver Creek. A pause. That's not entirely true. Daniel raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Emily looked at the notebook, then at the truck, then toward the distant hills. My grandfather used to say there were two versions of Silver Creek, the public version and the real version. Now Daniel was interested, very interested, because firefighters hear stories, town stories, local legends, conspiracy theories. Most turn out false, but occasionally one turns out true. Emily continued. The public version says the Pierce family created jobs, built businesses, saved the town. Daniel waited. The real version. She stopped, then shook her head. No one ever proved it. Proved what? Emily's eyes hardened. That some of their success came from disasters. The words hung in the air. Interesting. Not because they were specific, because they weren't. The accusation remained vague, yet somehow it felt important. Daniel looked down at the notebook, then opened it again. The final pages suddenly seemed much more valuable. For the next 2 hours, they read everything. Every page, every note, every entry. Most contained routine information. Equipment checks, fuel logs, volunteer schedules, community events. Nothing unusual. Then a pattern emerged. Certain names appeared repeatedly. Not highlighted, not obvious, just repeated. The same people, the same businesses, the same locations. Again and again and again. Emily eventually noticed too. You see it? Daniel nodded. Yeah, the names weren't random. Henry Walker had been tracking something, carefully, quietly, over years, almost like an investigation. Then Daniel reached a page, dated 6 months before Henry's death. The handwriting immediately changed. More hurried, more emotional, more afraid. Daniel read silently, then froze. Emily noticed. What? Daniel slowly turned the notebook toward her. The passage was short, only 3 lines, yet it changed everything. I finally found proof. The warehouse wasn't the first, and it won't be the last. If anything happens to me, trust nobody connected to Pierce Industries. Silence, complete silence. Emily stared. Daniel stared. The desert wind whispered through broken windows. Neither moved, neither spoke, because they both understood exactly what they had just read. The warehouse, not some old fire, not a different accident. The warehouse, the same warehouse fire that destroyed Daniel's career 20 years ago. The same fire blamed on him. The same fire that ruined his life. His hands tightened around the notebook. Slowly, very slowly, because a terrible possibility was forming. What if the fire wasn't an accident? What if it wasn't negligence? What if somebody caused it? And what if Henry Walker discovered the truth? The thought made Daniel's stomach turn. Because if it were true, then 20 years of pain suddenly meant something very different. Emily looked shaken. My grandfather died 3 months after this entry. Daniel looked up. How? Silence. A long silence. Then Emily answered. Car accident. Daniel frowned. Something about the way she said it felt wrong. Very wrong. Emily noticed, then quietly added something she'd never told anyone before. Grandpa always hated driving. Daniel blinked. What? He almost never drove. Another pause. He walked whenever possible. Daniel slowly looked back at the notebook. Interesting, because suddenly the accident didn't sound random anymore. Not even close. The afternoon sun slowly moved across the sky. Hours passed. Questions multiplied. Answers remained scarce. Then Daniel found something folded inside the back cover. A map. Old. Hand-drawn. Simple. At first it seemed meaningless. Then he noticed a circle. One location marked in red ink. No label. No explanation. Just a circle. And beside it, 3 handwritten words. The second box. Daniel stared. Emily stared. Neither understood. Yet both immediately knew it mattered. Because Henry Walker wasn't the type to leave clues for no reason. Not after everything they'd read. The reporter looked up. What do you think it means? Daniel studied the map. The location sat deep in the hills, north of Silver Creek. Far from roads, far from people, far from everything. Interesting, very interesting, because that's exactly where someone would hide something important, or dangerous, or both. Daniel folded the map carefully, decision already forming. Emily noticed. You're going. Not a question, a statement. Daniel nodded. Tomorrow. The reporter smiled slightly. Good. Daniel raised an eyebrow. You coming? Emily didn't even hesitate. Absolutely. That night, the desert grew unusually quiet. The kind of quiet that feels wrong. Daniel sat outside the fire truck house, watching stars emerge overhead, thinking about the warehouse fire, about Henry Walker, about the notebook, about 20 years of unanswered questions. Then headlights appeared in the distance. He immediately stood. Not one vehicle, 3, moving slowly. No lights, no noise, just dark shapes crossing the desert. Daniel's instincts instantly activated. The vehicles weren't approaching the road. They weren't approaching openly. They were trying not to be seen. And that meant trouble. Big trouble. Daniel slipped inside, moved to the window, watched carefully. The vehicles stopped nearly 300 yards away, far enough to hide, close enough to observe. Interesting, because surveillance meant someone was worried. Worried enough to watch, worried enough to monitor, worried enough to possibly act. One door opened. A man stepped out, holding binoculars. Then another, all watching the house, watching the truck, watching him. The notebook suddenly felt much heavier, because whatever Henry Walker had discovered, people were no longer trying to buy it. They were preparing to take it. And deep down, Daniel realized something else. The hidden compartment beneath the floor wasn't the real secret. It was only the first clue. The real secret was waiting inside whatever Henry called the second box. And judging by the men now watching from the darkness, someone was willing to do almost anything to reach it first. Daniel barely slept. Every few minutes, he found himself looking through the window toward the desert. The vehicles remained there, silent, patient, watching. Nobody approached. Nobody knocked on the door. Nobody made threats. Somehow, that made the situation worse, because patient people usually had plans, and desperate people usually made mistakes. Daniel preferred desperate enemies. They were easier to predict. The men watching from the darkness didn't seem desperate. They seemed confident, as if they already knew how the story ended. That bothered him a lot. Sunrise arrived slowly. Golden light spread across the desert. The vehicles disappeared before dawn. Gone. Not a single tire track remained visible from the house. Professional, very professional. Daniel stepped outside, carrying the map. Emily arrived 20 minutes later. An old Jeep, a camera bag, 2 bottles of water, and enough determination to get herself into trouble. The reporter climbed out. One look at Daniel's face told her everything. You saw them too. Daniel nodded. 3 vehicles. Emily sighed. I was hoping you'd say one. The fact she wasn't surprised concerned him. Has this happened before? The reporter hesitated, then nodded. Not to me. A pause. But people asking questions around here sometimes attract attention. Interesting, because that wasn't normal. Not even slightly. Daniel looked toward the hills marked on the map. The second box. Emily followed his gaze. Think it's really there? Daniel looked down at Henry Walker's notebook, then at the map, then toward the old fire truck. I think Henry wanted someone to find it. Emily smiled slightly. Let's hope he wanted the right people. The drive took nearly 90 minutes. The road eventually disappeared entirely. Then the trail disappeared too. The hills looked untouched. No buildings, no fences, no power lines, nothing, just endless rock formations and desert brush. Daniel parked beside a dry creek bed. The red circle on the map pointed deeper into the hills, a place vehicles couldn't reach, which meant walking. Emily adjusted her backpack. You know, normal people spend retirement fishing. Daniel smirked. Normal people don't buy collapsing fire truck houses. Fair point. The two started walking. Hours passed. The desert became hotter, the terrain rougher. Several times, Emily wondered if they were following a dead end. Then Daniel noticed something. A carved symbol on a rock. Small, subtle, easy to miss, but definitely intentional. He crouched beside it. Interesting. The symbol matched one drawn inside Henry's notebook. Not exactly. Close enough. Emily immediately saw it. Marker. Daniel nodded. Someone had left a trail. Not for everyone. For someone specific. Someone paying attention. The discovery changed everything. Because it meant Henry expected another person to eventually follow his path. The question was who? The trail continued. Another marker appeared. Then another. Then another. Each hidden carefully. Each pointing deeper into the hills. Hours later, the landscape finally opened into a narrow canyon. Daniel stopped. Something felt wrong. Not dangerous. Familiar. He studied the canyon walls. Then the ground. Then the old wooden structure sitting against the rocks. Interesting. Very interesting. Because it wasn't a cabin. It wasn't a shed. It was an old emergency supply station. The type firefighters sometimes used decades earlier during large wildfires. Most had been abandoned years ago. This one looked forgotten. Exactly the kind of place Henry Walker would have chosen. Emily stared. This is it. Daniel felt the same thing. The trail ended here. The markers ended here. The map ended here. The second box had to be nearby. Inside the structure, dust covered everything. Old tools, broken shelves, rotting equipment. Nothing valuable. Nothing obvious. Emily looked disappointed. Daniel wasn't, because hidden things rarely announce themselves. They required patience, observation, time, the same lessons firefighting taught him years ago. Look carefully, think carefully, act carefully. Eventually, his eyes landed on something unusual. An old fire extinguisher mounted on the wall. Nothing strange about that, except for one detail. The extinguisher looked newer than everything around it. Much newer. Interesting. Daniel walked over, grabbed it, then immediately smiled. Heavy, far too heavy. Emily noticed. What is it? Daniel removed the extinguisher from its mount, then twisted the bottom section. Nothing. He tried again. Harder. A click echoed through the room. The base separated. Emily's eyes widened, because the extinguisher wasn't an extinguisher. It was a container, a hidden container, and inside rested a small metal box. The second box. Neither spoke for several seconds. 25 years. 25 years. This thing had remained hidden. Waiting. Daniel carefully removed it. The box wasn't large. maybe the size of a shoebox. Steel construction, heavy-duty lock, weatherproof, professional. Whoever built it wanted it to survive. And it had. The lock itself had rusted badly, but not enough. Daniel used one of his tools. Several minutes later, the mechanism finally snapped. The lid slowly opened. Then both froze. Not because of money, not because of gold, because of photographs. Hundreds of photographs, documents, cassette tapes, insurance files, newspaper clippings, everything neatly organized. Emily immediately grabbed one photograph, then another, then another. Her face slowly changed. Shock, pure shock. Daniel looked over her shoulder and immediately understood why. The photos showed multiple industrial fires, different years, different locations, different buildings, the same people appearing repeatedly, standing nearby, watching, meeting, planning, and one face appeared more than any other. Randall Pierce's father, Thomas Pierce, founder of Pierce Industries, the man everyone considered a local hero, the man who supposedly built Silver Creek, the man Henry Walker had spent years investigating. Emily turned another photograph over. Writing appeared on the back. Dates, times, locations, names, evidence, actual evidence, the kind reporters dream about, the kind lawyers fear, the kind powerful people destroy. Daniel slowly sat down because he finally understood. The warehouse fire hadn't been an isolated tragedy. It had been part of something bigger, much bigger, a pattern, an operation, a business model, industrial properties, insurance payouts, land acquisitions, financial gains. People died, companies profited. The same names kept appearing. Again and again and again. Emily looked sick. My God, Daniel agreed. This wasn't corruption. This was murder. Repeated murder, spread across decades. Then they found the tapes. 5 cassette tapes, each labeled carefully. Witness interview, insurance meeting, warehouse recording, Thomas Pierce, final statement. Daniel's pulse quickened. Final statement. That sounded important. Very important. Emily held it carefully. We need to hear this. Daniel nodded. The problem was obvious. No cassette player. Not here. Not now. They would need to return. And suddenly, that felt dangerous. Very dangerous. Because people were already watching. Already searching. Already moving. And if Randall Pierce knew they found the second box, everything would change. Unfortunately for them, it already had. 3 miles away, a black SUV sat hidden behind a ridge. Binoculars focused directly on the canyon. The observer smiled, then picked up a phone. They found it. A pause. The voice on the other end replied. The observer nodded, then smiled again. Yes, sir. Another pause. The smile widened. Understood. The call ended. The observer looked toward the canyon one final time, then started the engine, because Randall Pierce had finally stopped trying to buy the truth. Now he intended to erase it. Back at the supply station, Daniel carefully repacked everything. Photos, files, Tapes, documents. The second box contained enough evidence to destroy reputations, enough evidence to start criminal investigations, enough evidence to rewrite local history. No wonder people were willing to pay $25,000. The truth was worth far more. Then Daniel noticed something tucked beneath the bottom layer. A single envelope, different from everything else, sealed, addressed by hand to whoever finally finds this. Interesting. Daniel carefully opened it. The letter inside was short, only one page. Yet by the time he finished reading, the blood drained from his face. Emily immediately noticed. What? Daniel looked up slowly, then handed her the letter. The reporter read it. Halfway through, her expression changed too, because Henry Walker's final message contained one terrifying sentence. A sentence neither of them expected. A sentence proving the danger wasn't buried in the past. It was still alive. The letter read, "If you're reading this, Thomas Pierce wasn't the man you should have feared. The real person behind everything is still alive. And he knows exactly where this box is hidden." Daniel Carter didn't speak for almost a full minute. The letter remained in his hands. The desert wind moved quietly through the canyon. Emily stood beside him, rereading the same sentence. Again, and again, and again, because neither wanted to accept what it meant. For nearly a day, they had believed they understood the story. Thomas Pierce, the warehouse fire, the cover-up, the evidence, the corruption, everything seemed to point toward one villain, one family, one answer. Now Henry Walker had destroyed that certainty with a single sentence. Thomas Pierce wasn't the man you should have feared. The real person behind everything is still alive. Daniel folded the letter carefully. His expression had changed. The look Emily noticed wasn't fear. It was something else. The look of a firefighter entering a building and suddenly realizing the fire wasn't on the first floor. It was underneath him. Everything became more dangerous after that. Emily finally broke the silence. What if Henry was wrong? Daniel looked at her. "You don't believe that?" She sighed. No, neither did he, because every page they had found pointed toward one uncomfortable truth. Henry Walker hadn't been guessing. He had been investigating, methodically, carefully, for years. And dead men don't hide evidence in steel boxes unless they're certain. Very certain. Daniel picked up the box. "We need to leave." Emily nodded immediately. For the first time since they arrived, she felt genuinely nervous, because now she understood something. The people watching the property weren't protecting a secret. They were protecting a person. And if that person was still alive, then everything was about to get worse. The walk back felt different. The canyon no longer seemed peaceful. Every shadow felt suspicious. Every sound felt louder. Every movement felt important. Daniel hated that feeling, not because it was uncomfortable, because it usually meant his instincts were trying to warn him, and his instincts rarely warned him without reason. About halfway back to the Jeep, he stopped. Emily noticed immediately. "What is it?" Daniel scanned the hillside. Silence. Then he pointed. Fresh footprints. Not theirs. The tracks cut directly across the trail. Someone had been here recently. Very recently. Emily's stomach tightened. Following us, Daniel crouched beside the prints, then frowned. Interesting, because the footprints weren't following them. They were heading toward the supply station, toward the second box, toward the evidence. Someone arrived after they did, which meant somebody already knew about the location. The realization made Daniel stand immediately. We need to move. The urgency in his voice said enough. Neither wasted another second. 40 minutes later, they reached the Jeep. Daniel opened the rear compartment, carefully placed the box inside, then started the engine. The vehicle bounced across rough terrain as they headed back towards Silver Creek. Neither spoke much. Both were thinking. Both were processing. Both were beginning to understand the scale of what they had uncovered. Then Emily finally asked the question neither had wanted to ask. What if Randall doesn't know? Daniel glanced toward her. What if Randall Pierce isn't running this? Silence. The possibility had crossed his mind too. More than once. Henry's letter changed everything. If Thomas Pierce wasn't the real mastermind, then Randall might not be either. Maybe he knew part of the truth. Maybe he knew none of it. Maybe he was protecting something without understanding who originally built it. The problem was that none of those possibilities made him less dangerous. If anything, they made him more unpredictable. Daniel focused on the road. We don't know enough yet. Emily nodded. Fair answer. The only answer. They reached Silver Creek shortly after sunset. Daniel didn't return to the fire truck house. Not yet. Not with the box. Not after the surveillance. Not after the footprints. Not after Henry's warning. Instead, they drove directly to Emily's newspaper office. The building sat near the edge of downtown. Small, old, almost forgotten, much like the newspaper itself. The office contained 2 desks, 3 filing cabinets, 1 ancient printer, and enough history to fill a museum. Emily locked the door behind them, then walked toward a storage closet. Several minutes later, she returned holding something unexpected, an old cassette player. Daniel laughed. Please tell me that thing works. Emily shrugged. Maybe. Not encouraging, but it was enough. The reporter carefully inserted the tape labeled "Warehouse Recording," then pressed play. Static filled the room. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then voices emerged. Old voices, recorded decades earlier. The quality was poor, but understandable. Daniel leaned forward, every instinct focused, listening, waiting. The first voice belonged to a man he didn't recognize. The second voice stopped him cold because he recognized it immediately. Thomas Pierce, no question, no doubt, the founder of Pierce Industries, the man Henry spent years investigating. The conversation continued. Money, contracts, insurance policies, property values. Nothing shocking. Not yet. Then one sentence changed everything. The unknown man spoke first. You understand what happens if another fire occurs. Thomas Pierce answered immediately. I understand the profits. Silence filled the office. Emily slowly looked toward Daniel. Neither spoke. The tape continued. The unknown voice spoke again. Good. Then came the line neither expected. The line that completely shattered the story. The chairman will be pleased. The chairman, not Thomas Pierce. Someone above Thomas Pierce. Someone giving orders. Someone receiving reports. Thomas Pierce wasn't the king. He was a subordinate. The realization hit both of them instantly. Thomas had never been running the operation. He worked for it. The recording ended minutes later. Neither moved. Neither spoke. Emily finally rewound the tape, then replayed the critical section. Again, and again, and again. The answer never changed. The chairman, the chairman, the chairman. The title appeared repeatedly. Never a name, never an identity, just a title. Yet somehow that title felt far more frightening than any name, because nameless power is difficult to fight. Very difficult. Daniel leaned back, then looked toward the remaining tapes. 3 more, potentially 3 more answers, or 3 more problems. Emily inserted the next cassette. Final statement. The label alone made her nervous. The tape clicked. Static filled the office. Then a voice emerged. Older, tired, familiar. Henry Walker. For the first time, they were hearing the man himself. Not reading his notes. Not reading his journals. Actually hearing him. Henry sounded exhausted, like a man carrying too much weight for too long. His voice crackled through the speakers. If anyone is hearing this, it means I failed. The room fell silent. Henry continued. For 23 years, I followed the fires, the money, the deaths, the cover-ups, and every road eventually led back to the same place. A pause. The chairman. Daniel exchanged a glance with Emily. The name again, or rather, the title. Henry continued. I spent years trying to discover who he was. Years trying to prove he existed. Then one day, I finally succeeded. Another pause. Longer this time. The old firefighter sounded shaken, even in the recording, even decades later. And that's when I realized something terrifying. The chairman wasn't hiding from me. He knew I was looking. The room suddenly felt colder, much colder, because the implication was obvious. Henry hadn't been hunting a secret. The secret had been watching him back. Then the recording reached its final minutes. The final revelation. The final warning. Henry's voice lowered, almost a whisper. If anything happens to me, don't waste your time looking for Thomas Pierce. Don't waste your time looking for his partners. Find the photograph. The photograph proves everything. Silence. Then the tape ended. Click. The room became completely quiet. Daniel stared at the machine. Emily stared too, because they both understood exactly what that meant. Somewhere in the evidence, a photograph existed. One single photograph. And according to Henry Walker, that photograph could destroy the entire lie. The problem, the box contained hundreds of photographs, and neither had any idea which one mattered. Then suddenly, glass exploded. The office window shattered inward. Both instinctively hit the floor. A dark object rolled across the room. Daniel's eyes widened. Not a bomb, not a grenade, a smoke canister. Thick gray smoke immediately filled the office. Emily coughed. Daniel grabbed the second box. The front door burst open. Heavy footsteps entered. Multiple people. Professional movement. Fast movement. The attackers weren't searching randomly. They were heading directly toward the evidence, directly toward the box, which meant one thing. Somebody finally realized Daniel Carter had found exactly what Henry Walker wanted hidden, and they weren't coming to negotiate anymore. Daniel moved before the first attacker fully entered the room. Years of emergency response training had taught him something important. When chaos starts, hesitation gets people hurt. The smoke spread quickly. Visibility disappeared. People shouted. Furniture crashed. Glass continued falling from the broken window. Somewhere inside the smoke, Emily coughed. Daniel grabbed her arm immediately. Move. The reporter didn't argue. The two rushed toward the rear hallway as shadows emerged through the front entrance. Heavy boots, purposeful movement, not random criminals, not amateurs. These people had arrived with a mission, and that mission was sitting inside the metal box Daniel carried beneath his arm. One of the attackers shouted. There, Daniel heard footsteps charging toward them. Fast, very fast, too fast. That meant they already knew the building layout. Interesting, very interesting, because only locals would have known that, or somebody who had studied the office beforehand. Neither possibility was good. The rear door opened into a narrow alley. Daniel shoved it open. Fresh air hit their faces. Emily stumbled outside first. Daniel followed, then immediately turned. The attackers emerged from the smoke seconds later. 3 men, black clothing, masks, no identifying marks. Professionals. One spotted Daniel. Their eyes locked. The man instantly pointed. There. Daniel didn't wait. The two sprinted down the alley. Behind them, footsteps exploded into pursuit. Emily's breathing became heavier. Fear was catching up. Daniel understood. Most reporters didn't expect to spend their evenings escaping organized assault teams. The situation was becoming ridiculous. Then a pickup truck suddenly skidded around the corner. Daniel's pulse jumped. Another attack. No. The driver leaned out. An older man. Gray beard. Weathered face. Get in. Emily recognized him immediately. Frank. The man nodded. Hurry. Neither wasted time. Daniel practically lifted Emily into the truck. The vehicle accelerated before the doors fully closed. Seconds later, the attackers reached the street. Too late. The pickup disappeared into traffic. Nobody spoke for almost 2 minutes. The truck bounced through downtown Silver Creek. Daniel sat silently, still holding the box, still thinking, still processing. Frank finally broke the silence. I assume those men wanted whatever you're carrying. Daniel looked up. The old man wasn't surprised. Interesting. How much do you know? Frank sighed. More than I wish I did. That answer immediately got Daniel's attention. Emily too, because Frank wasn't just some random local. He had served beside Henry Walker for years. Retired firefighter, former union representative, one of the few men Henry trusted. And judging by his expression. He'd been expecting something like this. 20 minutes later, they arrived at an isolated ranch outside town. The property sat hidden behind rolling hills. No nearby neighbors, no easy access, no curious visitors. Perfect. Frank led them inside. The ranch house felt old, comfortable, lived in, the kind of place built for privacy. Daniel finally set the metal box on a wooden table. Frank stared at it. A strange sadness entered his eyes. Henry actually did it. Daniel noticed. You knew about the box. Frank nodded slowly. Not the location. A pause. But I knew he was hiding something. Interesting, because Henry apparently trusted Frank enough to leave clues, but not enough to reveal everything. That said a lot. Emily explained the attack. The recordings, the chairman, the photographs, everything. Frank listened quietly, never interrupting, never reacting much. Then she reached the final revelation. The hidden photograph, the one Henry claimed, proved everything. Frank finally leaned back, slowly, carefully, as if something painful had returned. Then he spoke. The photograph exists. Daniel froze. Emily froze too. Frank noticed immediately. You've seen it. The old firefighter nodded. Once, only once, years ago, Henry showed it to him briefly, then locked it away. Emily practically stepped forward. What's in it? Frank looked toward the window, toward the darkness outside, toward memories he clearly wished remained buried. Then he answered, people, not helpful. Emily frowned. What people? Frank swallowed. The kind who aren't supposed to be standing together. The room became silent. Daniel waited. Frank continued. Politicians, business owners, judges, police officials. His voice lowered. And one man nobody would have expected. Interesting, very interesting, because suddenly this wasn't just corruption. This wasn't just insurance fraud. This wasn't even organized crime. This looked bigger, much bigger, the kind of network capable of surviving decades, the kind of network capable of protecting itself, the kind of network capable of destroying people, like Daniel Carter, like Henry Walker, maybe others too. Daniel opened the box. The search began. Hundreds of photographs covered the table. Old photographs, new photographs, building fires, meetings, property records, construction sites, insurance claims, people, dozens of people, maybe hundreds. The three spent hours searching, one photo after another. Nothing, then another. Nothing, then another. Still nothing. Midnight arrived. Then 1 o'clock. Then 2. Fatigue began creeping in. Yet nobody stopped, because somewhere inside the pile existed the answer. The one photograph Henry died protecting. The one photograph somebody was willing to kill for. Then Daniel found it. At first it looked ordinary. A group photo. Several men standing outside an expensive lodge. Nothing unusual. Nothing dramatic. Nothing shocking. Then Frank saw it. The old man's face immediately changed. All color vanished. His hands trembled. There, Daniel looked closer. then closer again, and suddenly understood, because the photograph wasn't important due to what it showed. It was important because of who it showed. Thomas Pierce stood in the photo. That wasn't surprising. Several politicians stood beside him. Also not surprising. Several wealthy businessmen. Again, nothing unusual. Then Daniel's eyes landed on the final figure, and everything changed, because standing directly beside Thomas Pierce was someone everybody in Silver Creek knew, someone trusted, someone respected, someone still alive, someone who appeared completely uninvolved. The current mayor, Mayor Walter Grayson. Emily nearly dropped the photograph. No, Frank nodded slowly. That's what I said. The mayor. Impossible. Or maybe not. Daniel stared at the image. Then something else caught his attention. The date, 24 years old, which meant Mayor Grayson wasn't some newcomer. He'd been connected to these people from the beginning, maybe longer. The realization hit hard, because Walter Grayson wasn't just popular. He was beloved. He sponsored charities, community projects, school programs, veterans events, everything. The town adored him, and according to this photograph, he'd stood beside the people responsible for countless deaths. Emily sat down. Hard. This changes everything. Daniel agreed. The chairman, the attacks, the surveillance, the corruption, the mayor suddenly fit perfectly. Too perfectly. A respected public figure made the ideal hidden leader. Nobody questions the man everyone trusts. Nobody investigates the hero. Nobody suspects the mayor, which made him dangerous, extremely dangerous. Then Frank spoke again, and somehow made everything worse. I don't think Grayson is the chairman. Silence. Daniel looked up. Emily too. What? Frank pointed toward the photograph. The chairman wasn't in pictures. Interesting, because that matched what Henry's recordings suggested. The chairman preferred shadows, distance, protection, never exposure, never risk, never visibility. Then why did the photograph matter? Frank answered before they asked. Because Grayson knows who he is. The room went silent again. That possibility hadn't occurred to anyone. Not until now. And it made horrifying sense. The mayor might not be the mastermind, but he knew the mastermind. Maybe even protected him. Maybe for decades. A sudden noise interrupted the discussion. Everyone froze. A vehicle. Outside. Daniel immediately moved toward the window. Headlights appeared in the darkness. One vehicle, then another, then a third. The blood drained from Frank's face, because nobody visited this ranch at 3 in the morning. Nobody. Daniel counted quickly. 3 SUVs. Black, identical, professional, the same kind of vehicles used during surveillance. The same kind of vehicles powerful people preferred. Then all 3 stopped, simultaneously, directly outside. The engine noise disappeared. Silence followed, a terrible silence, the kind that arrives before violence. Then somebody knocked. 3 slow knocks. Nothing rushed, nothing aggressive, almost polite, which somehow felt worse, much worse. Then a calm voice spoke from outside. a voice none of them recognized. "Mr. Carter." A pause. Another knock. "We know you found the photograph." The room froze. The voice continued. "You have something that belongs to us." Daniel looked toward Emily, then Frank. Neither spoke. Neither moved. Outside, the stranger waited patiently. Then he delivered the sentence that made Daniel's stomach tight. "Please don't make the same mistake Henry Walker made." Nobody moved. The knock still echoed through the ranch house. 3 SUVs. Unknown men. A hidden organization. A photograph worth killing for. And now someone standing outside calmly, asking for it back. Daniel Carter had spent most of his life around emergencies. Fire didn't scare him. Explosions didn't scare him. Even danger itself didn't scare him. What worried him were calm people. Calm people usually believed they had already won. The voice outside sounded very calm. "Mr. Carter." A pause. "We can solve this peacefully." Frank almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because everyone in the room knew it was nonsense. People who solved things peacefully didn't attack newspaper offices. They didn't spend decades covering up deaths. And they certainly didn't arrive at 3 in the morning with 3 black SUVs. Daniel slowly approached the window. Carefully, the vehicles remained parked. Their headlights illuminated the ranch yard. Several men stood outside. No masks this time. No weapons visible. Professional, controlled, confident. One man stood slightly ahead of the others. Older, gray suit, gray hair, perfect posture. The man looked more like a banker than a criminal, which made him even more dangerous. The stranger looked directly toward the house, almost as if he knew exactly where Daniel was standing. Then he smiled, a small smile, the kind that carried no warmth. "Mr. Carter." Another pause. "I'd like to talk." Emily moved beside Daniel. "What do we do?" Daniel didn't answer immediately, because the truth was simple. They had very few options. Run. The SUVs would catch them. Fight. The odds were terrible. Hide. Impossible. Not anymore. The organization knew exactly where they were. Frank sighed heavily, then surprised both of them. "Let him in." Emily turned. "What?" Frank nodded. "If they wanted us dead, we'd already be dead." Nobody liked hearing that. Unfortunately, it was probably true. The attack at the newspaper office proved they had resources. The surveillance proved they had resources. Finding the ranch proved they had resources. If killing them was the objective, there had been easier opportunities. Much easier. Daniel finally nodded. One person. A minute later, the front door opened. The gray-haired man entered alone. No bodyguards. No visible weapons. No fear. That last part stood out immediately, because the stranger wasn't acting brave. He was acting certain. There was a difference. A huge difference. The man glanced around the room. Then his eyes landed on the photograph. Interesting. For the first time, a genuine reaction appeared. Not fear. Recognition. The stranger smiled. "There it is." Daniel remained standing. "So who are you?" The man looked almost amused. "My name is Richard Vale." Nobody recognized it, which seemed to disappoint him slightly. I was hoping Henry at least mentioned me. Frank's face suddenly changed. The color vanished. The old firefighter stared. Daniel noticed immediately. You know him? Frank nodded slowly, very slowly. Oh God. Emily looked confused. You know this guy? Frank never took his eyes off Richard Vale. I thought he was dead. The stranger laughed softly. So did many people. The room became silent. Richard Vale calmly sat in a chair, like a guest visiting old friends, like he wasn't standing in the center of a conspiracy spanning decades. Then he looked toward Daniel. You've been asking the wrong questions. Daniel crossed his arms. Then give me the right ones. Vale smiled. Gladly. The man pointed toward the photograph. You think that's evidence? It is. No. The smile widened. It's bait. Interesting. Very interesting. Because nobody expected that answer. Vale leaned forward. Henry Walker spent years chasing ghosts. A pause. He eventually discovered something important. Daniel listened carefully, every instinct focused. Then Vale delivered the first major revelation. The chairman never existed. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The statement hung in the room. Impossible. The recordings, the files, the evidence, everything pointed toward the chairman. Vale watched their reactions, then nodded. Exactly. The man looked almost impressed. That's why it worked. Emily frowned. What are you talking about? Richard folded his hands. The chairman was never a person. Silence. The chairman was an idea. Daniel's eyes narrowed. The stranger continued. A title, a myth, a convenient ghost. The room slowly began understanding, and the realization was unsettling, because a ghost couldn't be arrested. A ghost couldn't testify. A ghost couldn't go to prison. People could blame the chairman forever, while protecting the real individuals involved. The scheme was brilliant, terrifying, and brilliant. Frank slowly sat down. My God. Richard nodded. Exactly. Then his expression changed. The amusement disappeared. The friendliness disappeared. What remained was something colder, much colder. Unfortunately, Henry eventually figured it out. There it was, the answer, the thing Daniel had been chasing. What happened to him? Richard remained silent for several seconds. Then he answered. He got too close. Not enough. Daniel stepped forward. What happened? Richard met his eyes, and for the first time, the man's confidence cracked slightly. Henry Walker was murdered. The room froze. Emily's breath caught. Frank closed his eyes. Daniel said nothing, because deep down he already knew. He just hadn't wanted confirmation. Richard continued. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't natural causes. It wasn't bad luck. The stranger looked toward the photograph. It was murder. The silence became unbearable. 25 years. 25 years people believed Henry died naturally. 25 years of lies. Then Daniel asked the obvious question. Who killed him? Richard Vale didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked toward the window, toward the darkness, toward the SUVs, then back at Daniel, someone far more dangerous than Thomas Pierce. Emily shook her head. No, Richard nodded. Yes. Then he delivered another revelation. The organization didn't survive because of businessmen. The organization survived because of politicians. Interesting, because suddenly everything connected. The permits, the investigations, the missing evidence, the lack of arrests, the protection. None of that happened without political power. None of it. Then Richard reached into his jacket. Emily instantly tensed. So did Daniel. The man noticed, then slowly removed a folder. Nothing more. No weapon. No threat. Just paper. He placed it on the table. Daniel opened it. The first page contained photographs. Current photographs. Recent photographs. People entering buildings. People attending meetings. People exchanging documents. Nothing unusual, until Daniel recognized one face. Mayor Walter Grayson. Then another. Then another. Judges. Police officials. State representatives. The network wasn't dead. It was thriving. Emily looked sick. How many people are involved? Richard smiled sadly. More than you'd like. Daniel flipped through the folder, then stopped. One page, one photograph, one face, a face neither he nor Emily recognized. Yet the name beneath it changed everything. Senator Malcolm Voss. Richard pointed directly at the picture. There, the room waited. The man continued. That's the real architect. The man who built the network. The man who ordered Henry Walker's death. The man who turned corruption into an industry. The atmosphere instantly changed, because this wasn't a local problem anymore. This wasn't a county scandal. This wasn't even a state scandal. This reached far beyond Silver Creek, far beyond Pierce Industries, far beyond anything Daniel expected. Then Daniel noticed something strange, very strange. Richard Vale, the mysterious man, the one bringing all this information, the one revealing everything, the one helping them. Something didn't add up, not even slightly. Finally, Daniel asked, "Why are you telling us this?" The room became silent again. Richard stared at him, then smiled, a tired smile, the kind worn by people carrying regret. A lot of regret. Then came the answer. Because 26 years ago, I helped build it. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Nobody even blinked. Richard Vale looked directly at Daniel Carter and quietly said, "I wasn't hunting the organization." A pause. I was one of its founders. The room froze, and suddenly, the man sitting in front of them became far more dangerous than anyone standing outside. Nobody spoke. The confession hung in the room like smoke after a fire. Daniel Carter stared at Richard Vale. Emily stared too. So did Frank, because everything they had believed during the last several days had just changed again. The man who helped them, the man who revealed the network, the man who exposed Senator Malcolm Voss, had also helped create the very organization that destroyed countless lives, including Daniel's. Richard seemed to understand exactly what they were thinking. He didn't defend himself, didn't make excuses, didn't ask for sympathy. Instead, he slowly leaned back in his chair, a tired man carrying decades of guilt. "I deserve the look you're giving me," Daniel's voice remained calm. "Start talking." Richard nodded. "Fair enough. Very fair." 26 years earlier, Richard Vale wasn't an old man carrying regrets. He was ambitious, brilliant, connected, one of the most influential political strategists in the state. Back then, the organization didn't begin as a criminal network, at least not openly. It began as a partnership. Business leaders, politicians, investors, developers, people who wanted influence, people who wanted money, people who wanted power. At first, the deals were simple: land acquisitions, construction contracts, insurance arrangements. Nothing unusual, nothing illegal on paper. Then somebody realized something. Disasters created opportunities. A factory burns down. Land becomes cheap. Insurance pays millions. Someone buys the property. Someone develops it. Someone profits. The first time it happened, everyone looked away. The second time became easier. The third time became business. And eventually, people stopped caring who got hurt. Richard lowered his eyes. That's when Malcolm Voss took control. The senator, the real monster, the real architect, the real chairman, or at least the man who created the myth. "Why stay?" Emily asked. Richard smiled sadly. "Because greed is addictive." Nobody argued, because everyone in the room knew it was true. The network grew. Cities, counties, states. The profits became enormous. Anyone who asked questions got buried. Anyone who investigated disappeared professionally, sometimes literally. Richard looked toward Daniel, then delivered a truth Daniel never expected. The warehouse fire wasn't supposed to happen. Daniel froze. "What?" Richard nodded. The property was supposed to be empty. The room went silent. The old pain immediately returned. The fire, the accusations, the destroyed career, the years of humiliation. Richard continued. The people inside were never supposed to be there. Daniel felt his jaw tighten, because that single sentence changed everything. The tragedy that destroyed his life wasn't planned. It was a mistake, a horrible mistake, one the organization spent decades covering up, because admitting the truth would have exposed everything. The fires, the fraud, the network, the people behind it. So instead, they blamed Daniel Carter, a firefighter, a convenient target, a man too honest to fight back politically. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Frank quietly asked, "Why help now?" Richard laughed, not happily, not proudly, just sadly, because he already knew the answer. "My daughter died." The room became silent again. Richard looked toward the floor, toward memories nobody wanted. 3 years ago. Another pause. Drug overdose. Emily's eyes softened. Richard continued. "I spent months trying to understand how it happened." His voice cracked slightly. Then came the truth. The drugs came from people connected to our network. Nobody moved. Nobody interrupted. Because suddenly, the story wasn't about money anymore. It was about consequences. Consequences that eventually reached everyone, even the architects. Richard looked toward Daniel. For 20 years, I convinced myself I wasn't responsible. A pause. Then I buried my daughter. The room understood. That was the moment everything changed. Not because Richard became good, because reality finally caught him. The machine he helped build eventually consumed something he loved, and he could no longer pretend otherwise. The old man stood, slowly, carefully, then slid another folder across the table. "This ends tomorrow." Daniel opened it. Inside were names, accounts, records, meetings, payments, evidence. Enough evidence to destroy careers. Enough evidence to launch investigations. Enough evidence to expose Senator Malcolm Voss. Emily looked stunned. "Why not release this yourself?" Richard smiled. "Because nobody would believe me." Interesting and true. A former insider looked guilty. A homeless firefighter looked innocent. A reporter looked credible. The story needed the right messengers, and Richard knew it. The next morning exploded. Not literally, politically, legally, socially. Emily's newspaper published everything. Every document, every recording, every photograph, every financial trail, every connection, every lie. The story spread faster than anyone imagined. Local stations picked it up first, then state networks, then national outlets. By noon, Senator Malcolm Voss became the biggest story in America. By evening, investigators arrived. Federal investigators, state investigators, financial crime units, everyone, because the evidence was overwhelming. There was nowhere left to hide, nowhere left to run, no explanation powerful enough, no lawyer talented enough, no amount of money sufficient enough. The truth was finally larger than the people protecting it. The arrests began 48 hours later. Business executives, political advisors, police officials, judges, developers, one after another. The network collapsed, not instantly, but rapidly, like a building whose foundation had finally cracked. The strongest walls often fall the hardest, and this network had survived on lies. Once those lies disappeared, everything else followed. Then came the moment Daniel never expected. The city council meeting. The same city that abandoned him. The same city that blamed him. The same city that watched his life fall apart. Every seat inside the hall was filled. Reporters, residents, firefighters, families. People stood against walls, filled hallways, crowded outside. Daniel hated attention, always had. But this wasn't about attention. It was about truth. The mayor had already resigned. Several officials had already been arrested. And now the city was finally doing something it should have done 20 years earlier. Listening. The investigation officially cleared Daniel Carter. Every accusation, every finding, every disciplinary action, gone, erased, not hidden, corrected. The city publicly admitted he had been framed. The apology felt strange, because Daniel spent 2 decades imagining this moment. And now that it finally arrived, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like peace. Then something unexpected happened. A young firefighter approached. Couldn't have been older than 25. The man stood awkwardly in front of Daniel. nervous, respectful, then handed him something. An old badge. Daniel froze because he recognized it immediately. His badge, the original one, lost after the investigation, lost after the accusations, lost after his life collapsed. The young firefighter smiled. "We thought it belonged with you." Daniel stared at it for several seconds, unable to speak, because sometimes the smallest things carry the heaviest emotions. Not awards, not money, not speeches. A badge, a simple badge. And suddenly, 20 years of pain felt lighter. Weeks later, life settled. The media moved on. The arrests continued. The investigations expanded. Justice finally started catching up. But Daniel Carter wasn't interested in headlines anymore. He returned to the fire truck house, the place everyone mocked, the place everyone dismissed, the place that gave him his life back. Volunteers helped restore it. Firefighters helped restore it. Local businesses donated materials. The forgotten structure slowly transformed, not into a mansion, not into a tourist attraction, something better, a community center for retired firefighters and emergency workers, a place for stories, a place for memories, a place for people who spent their lives helping others. Daniel thought Henry Walker would have liked that very much. One evening, as the sun disappeared behind the desert hills, Daniel sat outside the restored fire truck house. Quiet, peaceful, the wind moved softly through the desert. For the first time in years, nobody was watching him. Nobody was accusing him. Nobody was hunting him. The burden was finally gone. Then he noticed something. A small brass plaque mounted beside the entrance. Someone had installed it without telling him. Daniel stood and walked closer. The plaque contained only one sentence, a sentence that immediately brought a smile to his face. Sometimes the truth survives because one person refuses to let it burn. Below it sat two names: Henry Walker, Daniel Carter. The old firefighter stood there for a long moment, looking at the plaque, looking at the sunset, looking at the life he thought he'd lost forever. And for the first time in 20 years, Daniel Carter felt home.